In the fog-heavy hills of Missouri, they say children lie. They dream things, invent stories, get confused. But in the fall of 1851, the children of Harlow's Bend began speaking, with one voice describing a pale woman with black eyes and a smile too still. They saw her in barns, in mirrors, in sleep, and when their parents asked who she was, they all gave the same name, a name no one had spoken in 2 years. Claire Holloway, the girl who vanished, the girl they never buried, the girl who was never supposed to be seen again. It was Ruthie Collins who saw him first. Her brother, Levi, crouched in the backyard at dawn, his fingertips black with dirt and soot, dragging slow, deliberate lines into the packed earth behind their smokehouse. He didn't look up when she called his name, just kept drawing, his breath fogging in the cold morning air. By the time she reached him, he had nearly finished. A face, clear as a portrait, stared up from the dirt oval eyes, a long narrow nose, a small mouth pulled into a flat, unsettling smile. The eyes weren't like how children usually draw eyes. These were wide, knowing, watching. "Who is she?" Ruthie whispered. Levi's lips barely moved. "Claire." Their mother found them minutes later and gasped so sharply she dropped the kettle in her hand. She dragged Levi up by the arm and scrubbed his hands raw, muttering prayers under her breath. The name Claire never spoken aloud again. That night, Levi wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak, wouldn't sleep unless Ruthie stayed in the room. When she asked again about the girl in the dirt, he only said one thing before falling into a shaking sleep. "She watches the barn at night." Ruthie peeked out the window sometime near midnight. Fog curled against the ground, and the barn, tall and skeletal in the moonlight, seemed still until she saw a flicker behind the loft window. A pale blur, a face, unmoving, floating in the dark. She blinked. It was gone. Ruthie didn't tell anyone, because the next morning there was another drawing in the dust. A different child, a different yard, but the same face. And it was smiling. They found Mary Whitlock screaming outside the old barn before the sun had fully risen. Her nightgown was soaked through from the grass, her feet cut and muddy, and her mouth kept repeating the same phrase, "She's in the window. She's in the window." The men tried to calm her, called for her mother, wrapped her in wool, and whispered it was only a dream, just a trick of the fog. But the girl's eyes never blinked. Her hands clutched the hem of her gown so tightly the seams tore. When the Reverend asked what she saw, Mary's lip quivered, and she said, "She don't blink, she don't move, but she knows I can see her." They all walked to the barn, half out of concern, half out of the strange pull that comes when a child says something you wish they hadn't. The loft window stared down at them like a dark eye, lifeless and blank. Someone laughed nervously, said it was probably a shadow or an owl. But the fog hadn't lifted, and the cold felt older than the morning. The Reverend took his cane and stepped inside, climbing the creaking ladder with the caution of a man not quite ready to disprove the dead. The loft was empty, nothing but dust, hay, and old tools. But there was a patch near the window where no dust settled at all, just a clean, bare space, oval-shaped, as though someone or something had been standing there for a long, long time. Down below, Mary began humming. It was a thin, broken tune, one her mother swore she'd never been taught. When asked later if she could remember the woman's face, Mary nodded and drew it on the back of a church pamphlet in the same shaky lines Levi had used in the dirt. Same eyes, same lips, same strange, watchful stillness, and just like Levi, Mary called her Claire. By the end of the week, 3 more children had said the same. None of them knew each other. Different families, different ends of town. But they all spoke of the same pale girl in the barn window. And each time she was closer, a step nearer, a smile wider. The sheriff chalked it up to hysteria, blamed the traveling peddlers for bringing ghost stories, and scolded the children in the churchyard. But when his own son woke screaming one night and refused to sleep near a window, the sheriff boarded it shut without a word. That Sunday, the Reverend burned the pamphlet drawing. but the smoke curled in the shape of a woman's face before disappearing into the rafters. And no one mentioned Claire again, at least not out loud. Not while the barn still stood, not while the children still dreamed. They said it was impossible, that children lie, exaggerate, mimic each other for attention. But by the time the fourth child described her same long face, same dull black hair, same frozen smile, the town began to quiet in a different way. No one rang the church bell that week. No one let their children walk alone. And no one could explain how each child, days apart, drew the same face without seeing the other's sketches. Penrose arrived the following Thursday, stepping off the stagecoach in boots that hadn't yet learned the rhythm of Harlow's Bend. He wasn't a preacher or a sheriff, but something else, a man who carried a satchel full of letters, maps, and questions. The kind of man who asked what others tried to forget. They'd summoned him once before, years back, when a boy had gone missing downriver and turned up in the schoolhouse, well, tied to a chair and smiling. Penrose had found the chair, not the person who tied the knot. Now, he'd been called again, not by the townsfolk, but by a single letter signed only with the word, "Listen." He began by speaking with the teacher, Miss Bird, a quiet spinster with hollow cheeks and a red mark on her collarbone she kept tugging to hide. She said she hadn't heard the name Claire in 2 years, not since the girl vanished. She was bright, Miss Bird said, her voice clipped, read better than the boys, too curious for her own good. When Penrose asked how Claire disappeared, Miss Bird blinked hard. She stopped coming to class. That was all she gave him. No date, no notice, no search. As if a girl like Claire could be misplaced like chalk or a broken slate. Penrose's next visit was to the general store, where the shopkeeper remembered Claire's mother coming in once, after the girl vanished, looking like she hadn't slept in a week. She bought sugar and nails, said Claire had gone to stay with kin in Illinois. But she didn't look like someone who'd said goodbye. She looked like someone who'd heard something in the walls. At night, Penrose walked the perimeter of the Holloway barn. He didn't see the ghost, but he felt the cold shift just before dawn, the way the fog seemed to hang back from the window, like it too was afraid to look in. The next morning, he checked the school ledgers. Claire Holloway had perfect attendance, until the second week of March, 2 years ago. After that, her name was crossed out, not erased, not smudged, crossed out. Once, with a single slash of red ink, no notes, no illness, no withdrawal, just a mark, like a sin tallied. Penrose traced it with his finger and whispered her name under his breath. Claire. The air turned colder. Behind him, a child's desk creaked as if someone had just stood, but when he turned, the classroom was empty, or it had learned to hide better. The chalkboard was clean when the children filed in that morning, wiped smooth the night before by Miss Bird's steady hand, but by the second bell, a word had appeared at the very center of it, written in delicate cursive none of the children recognized. It said only one thing, I remember. No one claimed to have written it. No chalk was missing. The strokes were too neat, too poised, as though whoever wrote it had taken their time. Miss Bird scolded the class and wiped it away, but when she turned her back, the word returned, same size, same slope, same pressure, this time in a different corner. One boy screamed. 2 others refused to look. Ruthie Collins whispered that the ghost girl must be in the walls, writing from the other side. Miss Bird snapped, her voice shaking now, and struck the board with the edge of her ruler. The chalk cracked, the board split slightly down the center with a dry groan, and every child in the room went silent, not from the noise but from what they saw next. There was a shadow behind the board, thin, still, as if someone were standing just behind the wood, too close to move. No footsteps. No breath, just that unmoving, unnatural silhouette that no light should have cast. Penrose arrived within the hour. Miss Bird wouldn't stop pacing. The children had been dismissed, but one boy stayed behind, drawing circles over and over into his desk with the tip of a nail he'd hidden in his sleeve. She smiled at me through the board, he said. Not scary, just waiting. Penrose examined the back of the chalkboard wall and found nothing but brick and dust. No crawl space, no trapdoor, no passage. But as he pressed his palm flat against the cold wood, he felt it, the faintest warmth, like a cheek pressed from the other side. That night, Penrose reviewed the old school attendance rosters again, looking for any pattern. Claire's name had been written in red. Only one other name had ever been written in red since Josephine Bird, the current teacher, 31 years earlier, when she was just a girl. Her attendance stopped for 4 weeks. No explanation, just red ink. And then, just like Claire, she returned. But she'd never spoken of those weeks, not once, not in 3 decades. Penrose knocked on her door just past sundown. She didn't answer, but he saw the candle flickering behind her window. The flame bent sideways, as if something had passed in front of it. Slowly, deliberately, Penrose waited, then turned to leave. But as he stepped off her porch, he glanced back at the schoolhouse across the field. Every window was black except one, the classroom. In it, a girl stood facing the chalkboard. She raised her hand, drew one word in the air without touching anything at all. The letters glowed for just a second, and then they vanished. I remember, the boy had never spoken a word in his life. Not when he broke his arm falling from the hayloft, not when he saw his sister drown in the river, not even when the doctor stuck a pin beneath his fingernail to prove he could feel pain. They called him mute, touched, ghost-kissed. Some said his tongue had been cut at birth by a midwife who drank too often and repented too late. But that morning, he stood in the middle of the church aisle during Sunday service, barefoot and filthy, and whispered a name, Claire, just once. Just loud enough to freeze every hymn in every throat. His mother collapsed. The preacher dropped his Bible, and the boy just stood there, shaking, eyes wide, like he didn't know where the word had come from or what it cost to say it. They took him to the parsonage and locked the door, praying over him with oil and old verses, while the other children gathered outside and whispered. Ruthie said she saw something in the boy's eyes when he spoke. Not fear, not madness, recognition. As if he wasn't naming a ghost at all, but greeting an old friend. Penrose arrived just as the boy had fallen asleep, curled in a quilt that wasn't his. The Reverend was pale, sweat clinging to his brow. He said it once. Only once, he muttered, but it felt like a confession. Penrose crouched beside the boy, studying his face, his trembling fingers, the scrape on his knee that had started to bloom like a bruise. Has he seen her? Penrose asked. The Reverend didn't answer, but the boy, half asleep, whispered again. Not a name this time. A place. Under the floor. That night, Penrose returned to the schoolhouse alone. He brought no lantern, just a trowel and a thin-bladed knife. The floorboards groaned underfoot like they recognized him, and he peeled one back near the desk where the boy had sat 2 days prior. Beneath it was dry dirt and a smell like rain trapped too long underground. He dug, slowly, quietly, until he touched something soft, fabric. He pulled it up and found the corner of a dress, child-sized, gray with rot, patterned with tiny red flowers. Inside the hem, a name was stitched in fraying thread, Claire H. He didn't breathe, didn't move, until something shifted in the dirt just inches from his hand. A sigh, a hush, a voice without weight that said only one word. Remember. Penrose dropped the cloth and backed away, but the whisper lingered, curling through the floorboards like smoke. In the morning, the mute boy had vanished. No footprints, no note, no sign of struggle, just a scrap of fabric folded neatly on his empty cot. The same pattern, the same red flowers, and stitched along the edge in a thread that hadn't faded. Claire. Penrose found the man just before dusk, sitting alone behind the dry goods store, carving shapes into a tobacco crate with a rusted nail. He looked older than he was, like someone time had gnawed on slowly, taking little pieces here and there, but never finishing the job. His name was Ephraim Nash, and years ago he had been the deputy who filed the first report when Claire Holloway went missing. It had been a thin document, no details, no suspects, no follow-up, just 3 lines and a faded signature. Penrose asked why. Ephraim didn't look up. Because we were told not to ask, he said. Told by who? Penrose asked. Her family, Ephraim replied. And they were the kind of people who knew how to make questions disappear. The Holloways had been powerful once, back when land and silence were the only things that mattered. Their estate sat at the edge of town, half swallowed by vines and brambles, shutters nailed shut, the roof sagging like a sigh. No one had lived there in years, or so it was said, but everyone still crossed the street when they walked past. Penrose went anyway. The gate was locked, but rusted through. The porch groaned like a warning. Inside, the air smelled of mildew, wax, and something older, something sweet and wrong, like spoiled perfume. The parlor was filled with dust-thick furniture, velvet gone threadbare, portraits staring down with blank eyes. But what caught Penrose's attention was the attic door. It had 5 locks, all bolted from the outside, as if to keep something in. He didn't have the keys, not yet, but he noticed a line of ash across the threshold, thin as a thread, unbroken. Someone had drawn it carefully. Recently, when he turned to leave, he nearly missed the small photograph on the hall table, tucked behind a broken lamp. It was faded, curling at the edges, but the face was unmistakable. Claire Holloway, standing beside a large chair, her posture stiff, her expression unreadable. And next to her, seated in the chair, was another girl. Same face, same eyes, same dress, but paler, thinner, and smiling. Penrose flipped the photo over. A date was written in ink that had bled into the paper 2 weeks after Claire was reported missing. That night, Penrose returned to the boarding house and laid the photo flat on the desk. He stared at it until the candle burned low. 2 girls. Same face, but only one had a name, and the other, perhaps she wasn't missing at all. Perhaps she had never left, only changed rooms. In the corner of the photograph, barely visible in the grain, was something else, a shadow on the wall behind the girls. A third outline, arms too long, head slightly tilted, and no face at all. The Holloways had no graves, not one stone marked for any of the daughters who had vanished over the years. And there had been more than just Claire. Penrose confirmed it by walking row after row in the churchyard, where he found markers for the sons, the parents, even distant cousins, but not the girls. Not Abigail, not Lillian, not Rose. All of them gone before 16, all of them missing, not dead. Their names appeared briefly in the town, ledgers, birth dates, baptism entries, school records, and then stopped like a clock wound down. No funerals, no obituaries, just gaps where girls used to be. Penrose asked the sexton, a thin man with a smoker's cough and hands like old wood, if he remembered burying any of them. The man looked up from polishing his shovel and said, "I never buried what wasn't dead." When Penrose asked what that meant, the sexton spat in the grass and walked away. That night, Penrose returned to the Holloway estate. This time, he brought a lantern and a crowbar. He pried open the cellar door behind the house, half swallowed by weeds, and stepped into the damp dark. The air changed the moment he crossed the threshold, heavy and warm, like breath against the skin. The walls were lined with shelves, each one holding mason jars sealed tight with wax. Inside each jar floated scraps of fabric, bits of hair, yellowing teeth. One shelf held only broken doll heads, every one of them carved with a name. Claire, Abigail, Rose. Beneath the shelves stood 7 trunks. He opened the first. Inside lay a white dress, child-sized, neatly folded, with a ribbon still tied around the waist. Beneath it, a journal. The pages were filled with numbers and tallies, dates paired with single words: obedient, failed, replaced. The handwriting was crisp, measured, not frenzied, not mad. This was not the scrawl of someone unraveling, but of someone documenting, calculating. He turned to the last page and read the final entry. The face remains constant. It must. Else they forget which one they're meant to be. Penrose closed the trunk slowly. The lantern flickered. Somewhere above him, floorboards creaked. He didn't move. The air held its breath. Then the sound again, soft, measured steps overhead. 1, 2, 3. He turned down the flame and climbed back into the night. The attic window above him was dark, but as he reached the edge of the yard, he looked back. For just a moment, a pale shape stood in the window, not moving, not blinking, watching. He could not see her face, but he didn't need to. He already knew it. They all did, because it was always the same face. And now he was certain of one thing. The Holloway girls had not vanished. They had been kept, used, and one of them was still inside. The attic was not supposed to be warm, but it was. Penrose felt it the moment he stepped onto the top stair. Thick air, like a mouth had been breathing behind that door for years. The 5 locks were still intact, rusted but firm, each one shaped differently, as though whoever sealed it believed no single key should ever open it alone. He didn't have the keys, but the journal had named someone who might. Agatha Holloway, the last living matriarch, now wasting away in the poorhouse on the edge of town. No one visited her. No one spoke her name. The woman had outlived her husband, her children, even her reputation. Rumors said she talked only in riddles, called herself Mother of One, and stared at her reflection as if it were speaking back. Penrose found her sitting by the window, thin as thread, her white hair pinned up with the same precision as a bridal veil. Her eyes were cataract clouded, but when she turned to him, they sharpened like glass catching flame. "You've seen her, then," she said before he could speak. "Claire." Penrose didn't answer. He waited. Agatha smiled, a toothless stretch of skin that didn't touch her eyes. "They always come asking about the attic," she said, voice syrup thick. "But the attic is not where it began." She lifted a small tin box from her lap and opened it. Inside were 5 iron keys, nestled in cloth, each one etched with a name. "Claire, Rose, Abigail, Lillian, May," she whispered. "My girls, all perfect, all pure, all ruined when they tried to be only one." Penrose asked what she meant. Her face twitched. "You think the body is where the soul lives? No. The soul is shape, memory, posture. The face holds more power than blood. That's what he taught us." "Who?" Penrose asked. "The doctor," she said. "He came from Europe, said identity was elastic, said girls were mirrors if you trained them young. Strip the name, strip the voice, leave the face, and they can all be her." Penrose leaned forward. "Be who?" Agatha looked out the window. "The obedient one," she said. "The one who never left. The one who smiled when told." He asked about the attic. She placed the keys in his hand. "If she's still up there," Agatha said, voice low. "She won't remember who she is, but she'll remember what she was made to be." As Penrose left, she began humming softly, shakily, a tune he had heard before. The same one the children sang in their sleep. The same one Ruthie whispered in the churchyard. That night, he stood outside the Holloway house again, the keys heavy in his coat. Above him, the attic window flickered. Just once. A face behind the glass, but no breath against the pane, no fog, as if whoever stood there had already forgotten how to breathe. The attic door moaned as each lock gave way, one by one, until only the silence held it shut. Penrose stood there for a long while, keys in one hand, lantern in the other, breathing the stillness that poured from the crack beneath the frame. Dust floated like ash in the light. No wind, no rats, no creak from the house, just the heavy quiet of something waiting. When he finally turned the knob, the door swung inward an inch on its own, as if the attic had been listening. Inside, the heat hit him first, not the heat of fire or sun, but of breath, old, stale, thick with a sweetness he couldn't name. The air smelled of paper and iron and something faintly floral, like a girl's perfume gone rancid. The attic was bigger than it looked from outside. Sloped ceilings, shelves of books wrapped in cloth, and dozens of mannequins lined against the walls, each one dressed in identical gray frocks, their faces blank porcelain ovals without mouths or eyes. But one of them had hair, real hair, tied back with a red ribbon. Penrose stepped carefully, boots pressing into the creaking wood, as he circled the room. In the far corner sat a chair, child-sized, carved from dark walnut. Its arms were worn from years of gripping, its cushion pressed low. Above it, nailed to the beams, hung a mirror the size of a window shattered. Every shard had been glued back in place, forming a face that reflected nothing clearly. In the reflection, Penrose thought he saw someone move behind him. He turned. Nothing. But the mannequins seemed different, closer, their heads angled ever so slightly now, as if listening. In the center of the attic was a rug. Beneath it, the floor sounded hollow. Penrose knelt, peeled it back, and found a small trapdoor, latched with twine and sealed with wax. He cut the twine with his knife, pulled the door open. Darkness yawned beneath him, not black but thick like ink. He lowered the lantern. The stairs led down into what looked like a second attic, but older and colder. He descended slowly. Each step groaned like it hadn't been touched in years. At the bottom, he saw her, curled against the far wall, knees drawn to her chest, hair hanging like a curtain over her face. A girl, breathing, pale, alive. She didn't move when he approached. Her skin was paper white, her fingernails raw and broken, dirt packed beneath them like ink. Penrose whispered her name. Claire. The girl looked up. Her face was a perfect match to every drawing the children had made. The same one in the dirt, the same one in the mirror. But it wasn't recognition in her eyes, it was confusion, as though no one had spoken to her in years. As though she wasn't sure if the name was hers. "Which one am I?" she asked. Not afraid, just tired. Penrose didn't answer, because, for the first time, he wasn't sure either. Penrose carried her out just before sunrise, wrapped in his coat, her legs too weak to stand. She didn't speak again, not even as the morning light cut through the trees and brushed her pale skin with gold. Her eyes flinched like it burned, like she hadn't seen it in years. At the boarding house, he laid her in the guest bed and closed the curtains. The doctor came, an old man with shaking hands and a Bible tucked under his coat. He examined her with quiet disbelief, checking her pulse, her throat, the bruises around her wrists that looked like bracelets carved from time. "She's not sick," he whispered, "but she ain't right either." Penrose asked how long someone could survive like that, underground, forgotten, in the dark. The doctor didn't answer, just shook his head and told him to pray. But Penrose didn't believe in prayer. He believed in records, in ink, in maps and logic. He believed in the truth, even if it stank. That afternoon, he returned to the attic. Alone. The trapdoor was still open. The air had cooled, no longer humid but brittle, like something had exhaled its last breath and left. He found a ledger beside the broken mirror, bound in red leather and locked with a ribbon of black thread. Inside were sketches, dozens of them. Faces drawn in charcoal and ink, all the same girl angled differently, wearing different expressions, some smiling, some crying, but all clearly copied from life. Under each portrait was a name, but never Claire. Instead, Rose, Lillian, Abigail, Josie, May. The last few pages were blank, save for one sentence scratched deep into the paper over and over again. Same face, same face, same face. As if someone had been trying to remind themselves what was real, or what they were supposed to believe. Penrose flipped back through the pages, looking for a date, a clue, anything that tied it together. And then he found a small envelope tucked in the spine. Inside was a locket, gold, worn thin, with a single strand of hair coiled within. On the back, etched faintly, was the letter C, Claire. He held it in his palm, watching the way the sunlight caught on its curve. That was when he realized something. The ribbon of hair inside wasn't dark. It was red, not like Claire's sketches, not like the girl in the attic. He opened the ledger again. Every portrait had black hair, but the name May, scrawled in a margin, had a note beside it, died weekly. Penrose looked up toward the room where the girl now slept. Something cold spread through his chest, because if they'd dyed her hair to match the others, then maybe she wasn't Claire. Maybe she was one of the others, one who forgot her own name. one who had been trained to answer to a face that never belonged to her. And now, Claire might still be missing, or worse, might have been the one who taught them all how to smile. That evening, the girl sat by the window, legs tucked beneath her like a doll left in place too long. She hadn't spoken since that first question, "Which one am I?" But her eyes followed every movement Penrose made, calm, unblinking, as if memorizing him. The townspeople had begun to whisper again, that Claire Holloway had returned from the grave, that the house had given her back, but some swore it wasn't her. Claire had a birthmark on her neck, one woman said. This one doesn't. Claire could sing, said another. This one doesn't even hum. Penrose said nothing. Instead, he studied the girl's mannerisms. The way she kept her hands folded just so, the way she flinched at loud voices, the way she didn't speak unless asked directly. He'd seen it before in orphans trained for performance, in wards taught to obey without understanding. He began asking her questions, not about who she was, but about what she remembered. "Do you remember the attic?" She nodded. "Do you remember your name?" A pause. Then, "Sometimes." "Do you remember Claire?" Her face tightened, but she said nothing. He showed her the locket. She took it gently, turned it over in her hand, pressed it to her chest. Her voice was a whisper. "It's heavy." "Why?" he asked. "Because it isn't mine," she said. That night, Penrose returned to the Holloway estate, this time to the overgrown garden. There, buried beneath ivy and stone, he found a rusted metal plate nailed into a tree stump. Faded letters were carved into it. R.H. M.H.A.H.L.H. No dates, no flowers, just initials. Rose, May, Abigail, Lillian, 4 girls. No Claire. He looked down and saw something half buried in the soil below, an old child's shoe, torn open at the toe, its leather rotted through. He lifted it carefully. Inside was a slip of paper, soaked and brittle. He unfolded it slowly, revealing only 2 words, "Not her." As he stood, something moved in the orchard behind him, a shape, thin and pale, drifting between the trees. He followed, heart pounding. The shape vanished, but at the base of one of the trees he found something new, a series of carved marks, tally lines, dozens, some crossed out, some etched deeper than others. He touched one, fresh, still warm, he counted. There were 5 sets, 4 crossed out, 1 left untouched. As he turned to leave, he caught the faintest whisper on the wind, no voice, just breath-forming syllables too soft to hold. But one word rose clearly. Remember. Penrose did not sleep that night. And when he returned to the boarding house, the girl was not by the window. She was standing in front of the mirror, tracing her face with both hands. Slowly, repeatedly, as if trying to learn it before someone changed it again. The next morning, the girl refused to eat. She sat at the edge of the bed with her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor, as though something were written there, only she could read. Penrose tried coaxing her with soft questions, pieces of bread, even the locket again, but she only whispered one thing, "She's not gone." Her voice was different now, steadier, like something inside her had aligned overnight. Penrose watched her closely. There was something in the way she carried herself now, her posture straighter, her gaze more focused, like a thread had been pulled tight within her. He brought her a mirror. She looked into it without flinching, then reached out and touched the glass gently, as though greeting something she hadn't expected to return. "Is this my face?" she asked. Penrose didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he left her in the room and walked to the schoolhouse, now abandoned for the week. The boards had been nailed over the windows after too many children complained of shadows watching them during lessons. But someone had pried one loose. Inside, the air was stale, the desks scattered. On the blackboard, faint beneath layers of chalk dust, were the outlines of a hand, small, childlike, drawn again and again, overlapping, tracing the same lines until the shape was thick, distorted. Beneath it, scratched into the wood with something sharp, were the words, "Face first, then name." That evening, Penrose visited the county archives. The clerk was reluctant at first, but softened when Penrose handed him a flask and asked for records on the Holloway family births, adoptions, anything not public. What he found confirmed a suspicion that had been growing: 5 birth certificates, but only 3 recorded by midwives. The other 2 had been notarized by a physician from out of town. No attending nurse, no witness, just a signature and a seal. One girl had been recorded twice under different names, a year apart, same birthday. Same weight, same height, but different hair color. One dark, one red. The birth mother listed was Agatha Holloway for both, but the second had no father named, just a line drawn through the space. Penrose copied the documents, hands shaking. It wasn't that they were hiding a missing child, it was worse. They had made a child disappear by replacing her face, her name, her story, until even she couldn't tell who she had been. When he returned to the boarding house, the girl was sitting in the hallway, her hair combed back, a ribbon tied neatly, her chin tilted up as if waiting for a verdict. "Do you know who I am now?" she asked. Penrose looked at her and saw all of them, the weight of borrowed names, the symmetry of stolen faces, and behind her eyes, a flicker of someone still trying to breathe. "Not yet," he said, "but we're closer." She smiled. Not wide, not still, but real, and for the first time, she looked like someone who had survived being forgotten. It rained that night, slow and steady, soaking the roofs of Harlow's Bend like a blessing no one trusted. The girl stood at the edge of the porch in her borrowed dress, letting the rain slide down her face, hands loose at her sides, eyes fixed on the black sky, as if listening for something between the drops. Penrose watched from inside, notebook open on the table, the Holloway documents spread before him. The deeper he looked, the less the names seemed to matter. They were rearranged like furniture. Rose became May, May became Abigail, and Claire. Claire seemed to vanish in every ledger just before another girl appeared. It wasn't just identity that had been stolen, it was continuity. History rewritten one face at a time. He closed the book and stepped out onto the porch. She didn't turn. "What do you remember about the others?" he asked. Her lips parted. "Whispers," she said. "And hands, always hands, pulling, placing, folding me into someone I didn't fit." "Did you ever meet Claire?" he asked. A long pause. "I think I might have been her, once. Or maybe I only watched her, from inside." She pressed her fingers to her chest, then to her temple. "It gets blurry." Penrose hesitated. "Do you remember what happened in the attic?" Her shoulders stiffened. "They said it was a test. They said if I got it right, I could be her. But I never knew which version they wanted." "Who gave the test?" he asked. The man with no shadow. The phrase chilled him. He had seen that phrase once before, scribbled in the margin of a Holloway ledger beside the initials A. H. Penrose knelt beside her. "Claire was real. You're real. But they tried to make you all mirrors. Replacements." Her head tilted. "Then who was the first? The one they copied?" He had no answer. But in that moment, a memory surfaced. One of the photographs from the Holloway attic, 2 girls side by side. Same face, same dress, but only one smiling. The other had her hands clenched so tightly, the photograph had warped where the nails dug into the paper. He dismissed it as damage. Now he wasn't so sure. He stood. "We need to go back," he said. "To the orchard. There's something under those trees they didn't want found." She nodded, still staring into the rain. They planted secrets there, said roots were better than graves. Penrose felt the weight of the locket in his pocket and suddenly knew where to look. The first tree, the biggest one. The one with initials carved so deep they bled. They would go tonight, before anyone noticed, before the truth disappeared again. Behind him, the boarding house clock struck midnight. The girl whispered, "She only comes when the bell rings." He looked at her, but she was already walking barefoot down the steps, the rain washing her clean of whatever name she used to have. They reached the orchard just before the moon sank behind the hills, the wet grass brushing their legs, cold and sharp like it wanted them to turn back. The girl moved ahead of Penrose, barefoot, silent, as if her feet already knew the way. The trees loomed larger at night, gnarled and twisted, their trunks scarred with initials and deep-set wounds that never quite healed. It was under the oldest one, its limbs bent like arms mid-embrace, that the girl stopped. She knelt and pressed her palm to the ground. "Here," she whispered. Penrose crouched beside her and brushed away the wet leaves. The soil felt soft, too recently disturbed for land untouched in years. He dug with his hands until his fingers struck something hard. Wood. A small box, no bigger than a loaf of bread, wrapped in what looked like a child's shawl, gray with age and stained dark at the corners. He pried it open. Inside were 5 small items: a red ribbon, a thimble, a broken comb, a sewing needle, and a cracked porcelain button shaped like an eye. Beneath them, folded into quarters, was a piece of paper. Penrose unfolded it carefully. The ink had bled, but the words were still legible. "They tell me I am Claire. But I was Rose. I was May. I was whoever they needed me to be. I do not remember my real name anymore. Please, if you find this, remember me." The girl touched the button and drew her fingers away sharply. "It's warm," she said. Penrose closed the box. The rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy, as if the ground itself was listening. "Who buried this?" he asked. "She did," the girl replied. "The one who remembered." "Remembered what?" The girl looked up at him, her face pale in the moonlight, streaked with damp hair and a quiet grief too old for her years. That she was the first. Penrose understood then. The box wasn't a warning. It was a confession, a memory buried so it couldn't be rewritten. A name that refused to die, even if the face had been passed along like a mask. He placed the box in his satchel and stood. "We need to go," he said. "Someone will come looking." The girl stayed kneeling for a moment longer. "If I'm not Claire," she whispered, "and I'm not Rose, who am I now?" Penrose reached for her hand. "You're the one who got out." She stood, slowly, eyes lingering on the tree. "Then I want to be the last." As they walked back through the orchard, the wind picked up behind them, rustling the leaves, shaking the branches, carrying a sound that was almost a voice, not loud, not clear, but soft and full of longing. "Remember me." Neither of them looked back. The children began humming again. It started with Ruthie Collins, rocking in her chair, with eyes half closed, mouth barely moving. Then the preacher's son, humming through his sleep, the same tune rising from his throat like it had been waiting all along. By week's end, nearly a dozen children were caught doing it, always the same low melody, the one no one remembered teaching, the one that echoed faintly through the halls of the schoolhouse long after it was locked. Parents tried to hush it, punish it, pray it out, but the hum never left. It clung to the air like wood smoke, drifting between rooms, curling into ears and dreams. Penrose heard it outside the boarding house one night, a chorus of distant, wavering voices carrying through the trees. He stepped onto the porch and saw nothing, only fog moving low across the grass. But the humming stopped the moment he opened the door. Inside, the girl sat cross-legged on the rug, a mirror propped in front of her, eyes locked on her own reflection. She had painted her lips red with crushed berries, hair braided down the side like a photograph he'd seen in the Holloway attic. Penrose hesitated in the doorway. "Why are they humming again?" he asked. "Because they remember," she said, "not all at once, but something in them does." She reached toward the mirror, touched the glass. "I used to hum when I was scared. They said it was noise without meaning, but it helped me stay real." He stepped closer. "Did they make you stop? Did they make you stop?" She nodded. Said it, made the others confused. Said only the one who passed the test was allowed to sing. "Did you ever pass?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded slip of cloth, faded, fraying, stitched with a single letter, "R." "They gave this to me when I got it right. Said it was mine now, but I don't think I ever was her." Penrose took the cloth and held it in his palm. It was warm, like the earth beneath the orchard tree. "You don't have to carry their names anymore," he said. "You get to decide what's yours." She looked at him, and for the first time, He saw not just a face, but a person beneath it, someone building herself out of pieces no one could steal again. That night, the humming faded, slowly, like a fever breaking. One by one, the children fell silent in their sleep. The girl didn't hum again, not because she was told to stop, but because she didn't need to anymore. In the attic, the mannequins remained, still dressed, still waiting, but no longer watching. Their silence felt final now. Like the end of a play, no one would perform again. Penrose burned the red-stitched cloth in the hearth before dawn. The ashes curled like petals. No voice whispered from them. No name returned. Only the crackle of fire, and a breath that sounded, for the first time, like peace. The Holloway house stood quiet for the first time in years, but silence in a place like that was never a comfort. It was a silence that waited, a silence that remembered. Penrose returned alone before dawn, lantern swinging low at his side, boots crunching over gravel soft with moss. The key still fit the lock, the door still groaned like it resented being opened. He didn't bother with the main floor. He went straight to the attic. Each step creaked like it carried a ghost, each shadow stretched too long, as though watching. The mannequins stood where he'd left them lined against the walls, stiff in their gray dresses, porcelain faces blank. But something was different now. Their heads were turned, all of them, facing inward, toward the center of the room, toward the chair. It had been moved, no longer pushed into the corner, but now sitting dead center beneath the broken mirror, as though waiting for a child to take her place. Penrose circled it slowly, his hand trailing along its carved arms, the cushion still indented from years of use. There was hair caught in the fabric, black strands, red, a pale blonde thread, each color a name, each name a version. He knelt beside the chair and pressed his hand against the floor. The trapdoor was gone, sealed shut, the seams filled with wax, boards nailed cleanly across, as if someone had erased the entrance entirely. But he hadn't done it. The girl hadn't either. Someone else had returned. Someone who knew how to make places forget. He stood and turned back to the mirror. For a moment, his own reflection didn't move. It stared back at him, with eyes a shade too dark, mouth too still. He blinked. The image did not. He took a step forward. The reflection did not follow. Then, as the lantern flickered, the mirror caught something behind him. A figure not mannequin, not memory standing among the dresses. A girl, face half in shadow. He spun, but the space was empty. Just the rustle of fabric, the hint of breath. He turned back to the mirror. No figure now, only his own face, pale and drawn. And a word etched faintly into the glass, where no etching had been before. Left. Penrose stared at it, breath held. Not lost, not taken. Left. He whispered the word aloud, and in that moment, the lantern dimmed to a thread. He left the attic without touching anything more, locked the door behind him, walked back to the orchard as the sun broke over the hills. The girl was already there, standing by the first tree, barefoot in the dew, her hair loose, face turned to the light. "Someone was up there," he said. She nodded. "Some of us never learned how to leave." "But you did." She didn't smile, not quite. "Not yet, but I will." And behind her, the wind stirred the branches. No names whispered, no faces watched, just light and leaves, and the hush of something ending. The quilt was found by accident. Mrs. Dana, the preacher's wife, had gone to clear the last room in the Holloway house, what had once been the nursery. She meant to burn everything. That was the instruction. "Salt and flame," said the Reverend. "Clean the air." But under the crib, folded between moth-eaten pillows, she found the quilt wrapped in oilcloth, tied tight with twine that hadn't rotted. It was small, child-sized, sewn with neat rows of red thread that shimmered like veins under the light. No names on it, no initials, just symbols, circles, hands, eyes, a mouth sewn shut. When Penrose arrived, the quilt lay across the table like a confession. He ran his fingers over the stitches. The thread was old, dyed red but still vibrant, and each square was different. One showed a girl with no face. Another, a mirror with no reflection. One square had 7 dolls standing in a line, all wearing the same dress. And at the center, a tree, gnarled, split, with roots shaped like reaching fingers. "What is this?" he asked. The girl, now sitting by the fire, didn't answer right away. Then she said, "It's how we remembered." "You made this?" She shook her head. "The first one did. The real Claire." Penrose leaned closer. So she was real. The girl looked at the quilt, her voice barely above her breath. She was the one they couldn't break. So they buried her, and made the rest of us wear her face. He studied the tree square again. Beneath its roots, faint but deliberate, was a shape, an open mouth, screaming, stitched in gray. "Where is she buried?" he asked. "Beneath the house." The girl shook her head. They couldn't keep her in the ground, so they locked her somewhere deeper. "Deeper than the attic. Deeper than memory," she said. That night, Penrose laid the quilt across his bed and traced each square. Each was a memory, not written in words, but sewn in silence. A child's rebellion stitched into fabric, hidden beneath cribs and dust and years of forgetting. In the early hours, he was startled awake. The quilt had slipped to the floor, though he hadn't moved, and in the corner square, one that had been blank before, there was now a new symbol, a lantern. Unlit, but drawn in thread so dark it almost shimmered. Beneath it, a small X. He stared at it, heartbeat quickening. The girl stood in the doorway, watching. "She wants to be found," she said. "Even now. Especially now." Penrose picked up the quilt. The symbols were no longer haunting. They were instructions. A map made in needle and blood and memory. The house had hidden her. The orchard had tried to forget, but the quilt remembered, and now so would they. The lantern from the quilt led them to the root cellar behind the Holloway estate, a place no one had used in decades. The door had sunken into the earth, warped and bloated with rain, hidden beneath vines, thick as rope. Penrose cut them away in silence, while the girl stood behind him, holding the folded quilt to her chest like a shield. When the door groaned open, the smell rose first earth, mildew, and something older. Not rot, not quite. Something like sleep left too long in the dark. They descended carefully. The steps were stone, wet and crumbling, and the walls narrowed the deeper they went, closing in like the throat of something alive. At the bottom, the air was thick and unmoving. Penrose raised the lantern. The room was small, dirt floor, bricked walls. No shelves, no tools, just one thing. In the far corner, half swallowed by shadow, sat a wooden box no bigger than a cradle. It was carved with vines and thorns, its lid bolted shut with rusted hinges, and wrapped tight with chains that crossed over it in an X. The girl did not speak. Her breath grew shallow. She didn't move until Penrose stepped forward. "This is it," he said. "She's inside." "Not her body," the girl whispered. "Just what they took from her." He knelt beside the box, fingers hovering above the chains. Something buzzed in the back of his skull, a pressure like memory trying to surface. He looked at the girl. "You don't have to be here." "I do," she said, "because if she was the first, then I might be the last." Penrose reached into his satchel and pulled out a chisel. It took longer than it should have, each chain giving up a scream of metal as he pried it loose. When the final bolt came free, he paused. The lantern flickered. From the box came a faint warmth, like breath, like a heartbeat. He opened it. Inside, wrapped in rotting lace, was a mask. Porcelain, delicate, shaped like the face of a child. The cheeks were faintly pink, the lips painted with care, the eyes cut wide but lifeless. Behind it, tucked beneath layers of cloth, were scraps of ribbon, letters torn in half, and a dried braid of red hair tied with twine. The girl dropped the quilt, fell to her knees. "That was hers," she whispered. "That's what they made us wear." Penrose lifted the mask slowly. It was heavier than it looked. Not a toy, not a costume. A tool, for erasure, for replication. He set it gently on the floor and struck it with the chisel. Once, twice. On the third hit, it cracked. A sound like a gasp escaped the room, and the lantern flared before going still. The girl covered her face and wept, not from fear, but release. Something had ended. Something had finally broken that could not be put back. Penrose placed the pieces in the box. This time, they would not be worn again. They buried the mask at the base of the oldest tree in the orchard. Just after dawn, the girl dug the hole herself, fingers raw and trembling, but she didn't stop. Not when her nails broke, not when the soil turned red with her effort. She laid the shattered porcelain in the ground like bones and whispered something that Penrose couldn't hear. It didn't sound like a name. It sounded like goodbye. The wind picked up the moment they covered it. No birds sang, no leaves stirred. Just the quiet exhale of something that had waited too long to be let go. Penrose stood back, watching her press the dirt flat with her hands. She didn't cry. Her face was steady, as if the grief had already passed through her and left something else behind. Not peace, but clarity. She was never angry, the girl said after a while, not even at the end. How do you know? Penrose asked. Because she made the quilt, not for revenge, for memory. She stood and wiped her palms against her dress. She wanted us to know we were real, even if they changed our names, even if they made us wear her face. Penrose nodded. The trees swayed gently now, no longer menacing, no longer watching, just trees. And for the first time, the orchard smelled like rain and sap, not like secrets. They walked back toward the town in silence. No one stopped them. No one asked questions. But whispers began to shift. The children stopped humming. The preacher stopped locking the chapel doors at night. Ruthie Collins laughed again for the first time in weeks. Whatever had lingered in the corners of the town was lifting, slowly, like fog from the riverbank. At the boarding house, the girl packed a small bag. She folded the quilt last, smoothing each square with care. "Where will you go?" Penrose asked. "North," she said, "where no one knows my face. Will you take a name?" She looked at him, eyes calm, voice sure. "I'll make one." She walked down the road alone, hair loose, feet steady. At the edge of town, she turned once not to wave, but to look, not at Penrose, not at the buildings, but at the hills behind them, where the house stood, where the chair waited, where the mirror cracked and the masks were made. Then she faced forward again and did not turn back. Penrose stayed behind, not because he couldn't follow, but because someone had to remain. To keep the ledgers open, to remember which names were stolen and which were buried. The Holloway house would be burned, the records copied. And if anyone asked what happened that summer, Penrose would say only this: there was a girl who was made to be many, but she became one, and that was enough. The fire took the Holloway house in under an hour. Flames caught fast to the dry wood, climbed the walls like they had been waiting, licking at the windows, devouring the roof with a hunger that felt almost personal. No one in Harlow's Bend tried to stop it. Some watched from a distance, arms crossed, mouths set, as if they were attending a funeral no one had been invited to, but everyone needed. Penrose stood at the edge of the orchard, the quilt folded under his arm, the smoke curling into the morning sky like an exorcism. He didn't flinch when the attic collapsed. He only watched. The mannequins burned slowly, each porcelain head cracking in the heat. The chair blackened and fell through the floor. The mirror shattered again, this time with a sound like a bell struck too hard. By midday, only the stone steps remained, blackened, empty. When it was done, Penrose walked through the ash. He stepped over what had been the threshold and into the skeleton of the house. Every room was hollow now, every secret charred. But at the center of it all, where the nursery had once been, something had survived. A single nail, driven deep into the wall, still held fast. From it hung a length of red thread, swaying gently in the hot wind. He reached up and pulled it loose. It came away with a snap, and for a moment the quiet deepened, as if something had been unpinned from the world. He kept it in his coat pocket, not as a keepsake, as proof that something had happened here, something real. In town, the children began drawing again. This time, not the ghost, not the face. They drew trees, hands, rivers, girls with braids and bare feet. One child drew a quilt with no faces at all, just colors. Ruthie Collins gave it to Penrose in a folded square. She said it's what the new girl might look like now, she explained. Penrose placed it with the rest. He had begun a new book, not an investigation, not a report, a record, a truth. He wrote their names, the ones he found, and left space for the ones he didn't. The girl had been right, names mattered, even if they were stitched instead of spoken, especially then. That night, he sat alone by the orchard, listening. No hum, no footsteps, no whisper, just wind in the leaves and the soft creak of branches. Behind him, the ashes of the house cooled. Before him, the trees stood tall and still. He thought of the girl walking north, of the weight she had carried, of the face she had left behind, and he hoped without prayer, without superstition, that wherever she stopped, she would not be called by any name but the one she chose for herself. Penrose didn't dream often, but when he did, it was never kind. That night, the fire still burned behind his eyelids. Not wild, not fast, but slow, deliberate, like hands carefully peeling back the skin of the house until only the bones remained. In the dream, he stood once more in the attic. But it was not empty. The mannequins were seated in rows like schoolchildren, heads tilted, hands folded in their laps. At the center sat the chair, upright and waiting. The mirror was whole again, gleaming, and in it, his own face stared back. But it was not his. The eyes were wrong, too wide, too still, too much like hers. He woke with a jolt, sweat cooling on his neck, heart hammering against the silence. Morning had come gray and slow, the kind of day that never quite shakes the fog. Outside, the town was stirring slow wagon wheels, roosters, voices carrying on the breeze. Normal things, ordinary things. But something had shifted. He could feel it in his bones, in the pit of his stomach. He dressed quickly and stepped out into the street. Ruthie was waiting on the porch, a folded scrap of paper in her hand. "The post rider found this nailed to the chapel door," she said. No one saw who left it. Penrose unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. A child's hand, likely coached. 4 words. "She isn't the last." Beneath it, a symbol drawn in red ink, a mirror with a line cracked through its center. He felt the weight of the thread in his coat pocket, touched it, tightened his grip. Who else saw this? "Only me," Ruthie said. "Should I burn it?" "No," Penrose said quietly. "Let it stay." He pinned the paper to the back of his journal, not out of fear, but out of duty. If the girl wasn't the last, someone would need to remember that too. The Holloway house was gone, but the idea of it, the machinery of silence and shape and stolen names, could live anywhere. All it needed was someone willing to look at a child and see a mask instead of a person. That was the real danger. That was what Claire had fought against, not just erasure, but replacement. He walked to the schoolhouse. The windows had been unboarded. The children's drawings now covered the walls. New ones, honest ones, messy, bright, full of things not seen in dreams. He sat at the teacher's desk and opened the final page of his new book. He wrote slowly, carefully. The face does not tell the whole story. Neither does the name. Look for the thread, the one thing they could never sever. And beneath that, he stitched the line into the paper with a needle and red thread. Not ink, not memory. Something harder to erase. Something real. It was Ruthie who saw her first. Not the girl who left, but another smaller, younger, standing just outside the orchard with her bare feet in the frost and her arms folded across her chest like she didn't know how to hold them. She wasn't crying. She wasn't smiling, just watching the trees, as if waiting for something to return. Ruthie called out, soft and unsure, but the girl didn't answer. When Penrose arrived, the child was still there, still silent, her dress too thin for the cold and stained with something dark near the hem. Not blood, not dirt, ink, thick and black, like it had soaked through from the inside. He knelt beside her, his voice even. "What's your name?" She blinked once, slow, her gaze distant. "They told me not to have one," she said. Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, like someone had scraped it away and left only the echo. "Did someone bring you here?" he asked. "I followed the humming," she said, "but it stopped before I reached the house." Penrose looked to the orchard. The trees stood still. No wind, no whisper. Just the faint scent of ash and memory. He offered her his coat, but she shook her head. "She said to wait where the mirror breaks," the girl said. "She said someone would come." "Who told you that?" "The one who left," she said. "The one who didn't forget." He felt something tighten in his chest. The girl from before the one who walked north had left a trail, not just of memory, but of resistance, of rescue. He held out his hand. "Would you like to come inside?" The child hesitated, then nodded. Her fingers were cold, but she held on tightly, like someone who had not been offered a hand in a very long time. He led her to the schoolhouse, where the hearth still held the echo of last night's fire. Ruthie brought a blanket. No one asked more questions. Not yet. That night, Penrose opened the journal again. He added a new page. No name at the top, just a symbol, a broken mirror stitched in red, and beneath it, she arrived without a name, but not without hope. He left the book open on the desk, in the room where the drawings hung like prayers, where truth had been sewn into the walls and ashes no longer held power. Outside, the orchard rustled, only once, as if something buried had finally turned its face to the light. Penrose stepped onto the porch and watched the edge of the woods. No figures moved, no shadows stretched, but he had the feeling deep, quiet, that the story wasn't ending. It was unfolding, and this child, like the last, would not be forgotten. Not this time. The girl spoke for the first time in days while sitting on the schoolhouse floor, legs crossed, fingers busy pulling threads from the hem of her sleeve. The fire crackled low behind her, but she didn't turn to it. Her eyes stayed on the door, as if waiting for someone to arrive or return. Penrose had seen that look before on the others, the ones who remembered too much, too young. He sat across from her and waited. No pressure, no questions, just presence, she finally said. "They called me Bird." "Who did?" he asked. "The ones before, the ones who left." "Is that your name?" She shook her head. "It's the sound I made when I tried to scream." He didn't flinch. He just nodded and waited. She tugged one final thread loose and held it up, red and fraying, turning it slowly between her fingers. "I dream of her," she said. "The one they copied, the first one. She doesn't speak in the dream, she just watches." "What does she want?" Penrose asked. "For someone to stay." The words landed hard, deeper than he expected. For all his records, his ledgers, his stitched pages, and burned names, he hadn't realized that what haunted these children most wasn't the masks or the silence, it was abandonment. Each of them had been shaped to be someone else, and when the shape no longer fit, they were discarded, lost, misremembered. But this girl wasn't forgotten yet, not entirely, and she didn't want to be saved, she wanted to be stayed with, remembered in real time, not as a story, not as an echo, as herself. Penrose leaned forward, unbuttoned the journal from his coat pocket, and tore out a blank page. He placed it between them. "I won't give you a name," he said, "but I'll write down whatever you choose." She looked at the paper, then at him. "Anything, anything," she thought for a long moment. Then, slowly, she set the red thread down and reached for the pencil. Her hand trembled as she pressed the tip to the page. The word she wrote was short, not a name, a sound, a choice. One, she whispered aloud like a promise. "Wren." Penrose nodded. "Wren it is." He folded the paper and placed it carefully in the front of the journal, where it would not be lost. She smiled, not wide, not certain, but enough to light her face for the first time. Outside, the sky was turning gold. The orchard stood quiet. The house was gone. The masks were ash, and the faces that would come next, whatever they looked like, would be chosen, not given. Penrose watched the girl turn toward the window, hair lit by the Sunday, and he knew, finally, what to write as the last line. She was not what they made her. She was what she made herself. Comment the oldest town in your country. And if you want more stories that whisper long after the screen goes dark, like and subscribe to The Black Chapter.